Russell Hansen, and I'm here to talk to you today about deliberative democracy in the networked public sphere using social media to talk politics. So this all starts with what I take to be a pretty common experience, arguing with people online. There are plenty of different reasons for and kinds of arguments to be had on platforms like Facebook, Reddit, and Twitter, and most of us see bits and pieces of these arguments pretty much every day. What's interesting to me, however, are the kinds of arguments that have to do with politics, and what it means for us to have them in online spaces, especially when it comes to assessing the health of democracy in the United States. So one way to look at this issue is to start with German philosopher Jurgen Habermas' explication of the term public sphere. To quote Habermas, by public sphere we mean, first of all, a realm of our social life in which something approaching public opinion can be formed. Access is guaranteed to all citizens. A portion of the public sphere comes into being in every conversation in which private individuals assemble to form a public body. It is therefore a critical space in which ideas can be presented, evaluated, critiqued, and revised. Though he was also describing a historical development in Enlightenment-era Europe, Habermas gave us an ideal theory for public political discussion to conform to. The public sphere would be a discourse situation in which political opinions and the reasons for having them are exchanged publicly. In virtue of their publicity, beliefs are openly and inclusively made the subject of inspection and critique by all. Through respectful discourse, in which each is given an equal opportunity to make their reasons and endorsements known, the people aim to reach a rational consensus about how they ought to govern themselves. Of course, it doesn't actually play out like this. Public sphere discussion is often emotional and strategic. It is systematically distorted by state and market forces, and institutions are not held accountable. It is exclusionary, and some voices are much louder than others. Participation is insincere, antagonistic, and detached. It is also fragmented. Another major thing to recognize about the public sphere is that it is mediated in many different ways, which is to say that a number of different communication channels are instantiated, a number of different communication channels carry a variety of messages relevant to public interests. In addition, most of these channels are instantiated in transnational networks of digital information communication technologies. Furthermore, critiques by scholars such as Nancy Fraser and Michael Warner have pointed out that it is empirically false to posit a unified, singular public sphere accessed by all, suggesting instead that we recognize both a hegemonic public governed by the dominant culture and multiple subaltern counterpublics that challenge its claim to the authoritative legitimacy of its deliberative processes. These worries encourage us to consider how the public sphere discourse that we actually see happening in online spaces differs from the regulative ideal, and why. So why does this all matter? In the end, I'm endorsing here a deliberative conception of democracy that depends upon a healthy public sphere. This conception places a heavy emphasis on how public opinion is formed. Simply voting is not sufficient for representation, and decisions are best made when we deliberate about them first. In addition, it insists that a state is only truly legitimate when it acts in accordance with the will of the people, formed through a rational process of deliberation. To address the topic of this event, I've chosen to focus on how disruptions in the public sphere account for some of the differences between the actual and the ideal public sphere. To begin with, our public sphere is structurally fragmented, in that it is marked by homophily, information silos, and echo chambers. This is to say that groups form which do not engage with other groups. It is effectively mute or incapable of interacting with institutions. Decisions might be made, but they don't affect higher-level political processes. Bots spam content, trolls disrupt arguments with insincere participation, and partisans are unwilling to reciprocate in reason-giving and reason-receiving. Disinformation, both intentionally harmful and untrue, proliferates without restraint. Take, for example, the spread of utterly false news stories by Macedonian news mills during the 2016 presidential election. Similarly, there's been a loss of mutual trust in sources and agreed upon credentialing of facts, which means we have no common ground upon which to argue. In this environment, political actors can lie without consequence. Finally, organizations such as Cambridge Analytica use massive amounts of personal information to craft and target political content. When this is combined with flows of dark money, it can effectively be considered election tampering. Thus, the work that is being done, that I do, illuminates a path towards solutions and understanding by answering such questions as, how do features offered by social media platforms affect the quality of deliberation? How well does political discussion on each site cohere to the public sphere ideal? And most importantly, what responsibilities do we have to support political discussion in online spaces? Thank you.